Now, this morning, what I want to talk about is the battle within your mind. Has anyone else ever noticed that there's a battle going on in your mind? Am I the only one? All right, a few of us, we've noticed this. Now, let's start here in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, the Apostle Paul again. This is a series with lots of wisdom from Paul, ancient wisdom from 2,000 years ago. Though we live in the world, again, Paul is writing to a group of followers of Jesus, the church at Corinth. And he says, "For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." Now, what in the world is he talking about? I think I have about 10, 12 questions for us to sift through this morning. And what I noticed with this verse is that one question, you kind of answer it, but then it raises another question, which then raises another question, and then another question. So there shall be a series of questions for us to dive into this morning. First, let's start right there, verses 3 through 4 in the beginning. We do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. Our first two questions for us. How does the world fight? Think about this for a moment. We all know how the world fights. We see it on TV. We witness it with those around us. We engage in this war at times with our words, with our actions. Here's another question. What are the weapons of this world? And I have a picture for us. Here is some typical weapons that we think of when we think of warfare. How does the world wage war? With violence, power. And there are physical weapons, but then there's also the words that we use, which can be just as effective, and they can tear people down just as much as physical weapons can. You can tear others down emotionally, mentally, by the words that you speak, those cutting remarks that we make. The words or the comments where you know can just cut right to the heart of that person. If you were to say this, you know that you would bring them down. Those who are victorious in this world are the ones who are bigger, stronger, the ones who have more firepower. When Paul talks to the church at Corinth, he's saying there's a way in which the world wages war, and we all know what that looks like, but the way in which this war that I'm talking about, the war that's in your mind, takes place, it's a little bit different. As followers of Jesus, Paul is inviting others into a different type of warfare with different types of weapons. This is a different path to victory, and it's a different type of war than what we typically think when we think about war. This is how Paul is setting this argument up. Hey, I know what you've seen. I know what you've witnessed. I know what the world tells you will bring you power and victory, but I'm to show you there's another way. There's a better way. And in Paul's mind, from what he's experienced, this other way of waging war, his argument is that it's actually even more powerful than what you see acted out in the world. Now, verse 4, on the contrary, they have divine power, these weapons that Paul is talking about, they have divine power to demolish strongholds, which then raises another question for us. It's the question, well, where does this power, this victory come from? Who's been tracking with us this morning? Notice right here, verse 4. These weapons have what kind of power? Divine power. Where does the power of victory come from? It comes from God. Not from our own strength. Sometimes we think, all right, if I just dig my heels in, I can make some sort of victory for myself. And we feel really strong and powerful. And Paul's like, that's not what I'm talking about. Then there's other moments when we feel really weak. and we feel as if we're up against something that is more powerful and more stronger than us, and we think there's absolutely no way I could ever defeat this, and you're left with this feeling of hopelessness, powerlessness, and Paul's saying it's in that moment when you're actually really strong. Because this power doesn't rely on you. This is this divine power that comes from a source that's beyond yourself, beyond the power that you on your own can muster. Paul is saying there's a way to tap into a different power than simply your own. Now, another question for us. What does this power accomplish? Here's the answer for you. The demolishing of strongholds, which of course you know exactly what Paul is talking about, right? We talk about strongholds all the time. You probably mentioned that in your group chat this week, right? You're like, oh man, we were demolishing strongholds all week long. That's how we talk. Another question for us. Well, what are strongholds? I mean, this is how you read the Bible. You read it, you have a question, maybe you get a little bit of an answer, and then it raises another question for you. And then you come to some conclusion, some answer, but then it raises another question. This is the best way to read the Bible. You read your Bible with a notebook right next to you, and you just, all the questions that are raised, you write it down, then you go about trying to find answers to those questions. So what exactly are these strongholds that are being demolished? Verse 5, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. Now, in order to answer what a stronghold is, we have to look at this word knowledge, which is the Greek word gnosis, which means firsthand knowledge gained from experience. There is knowledge, something that you read in a book, and then you take the test, and you just report back on the things that you've memorized in your head, and you hope that you circle the right bubble. You all remember those kind of tests that you took? But then there's a different way of knowing. Paul's not talking about the Scantron way of knowing. Paul's talking about a knowledge that comes from having experienced something in your life. This is first-hand experience. This is first-hand knowing. So, back to our original question, what is a stronghold? Let's answer it this way. A stronghold is anything that prevents us from experiencing and living into the truth of God. Anything that prevents you from knowing, first-hand knowing, the truth of God is a stronghold. And Paul's saying, if you put into practice what I am teaching you, I will show you a way to demolish anything that stands in the way of you knowing truth, of you experiencing God. My guess as to why you're here this morning is you want to demolish strongholds. You want to experience the truth of the living God. You're here this morning. You come week after week. You start these group chats. You take these photos because you want to be led into a deeper knowledge of God. Not something that you can read and memorize, but a real experience with the living God that transforms your life. This is what Paul is trying to teach the Corinthians. Now, here's a couple examples of some of the strongholds that prevent us from knowing God. What about lies? And these lies, they come externally, and they also are internal. Remember, your mind is a battlefield. Have you ever lived for years believing a lie about yourself? And that shaped you. Someone has said something to you, you heard a message, and it was a lie, but you believed it. And that has shaped your life for years. And the truth is, it hasn't shaped you in a good direction. It hasn't shaped you to look more like the person of Jesus. It hasn't led you into a deeper experience with God. What about, have you ever believed a lie about God? Someone has said something about what God is like, about who God is, and you lived with that. And it was a warped view. So these strongholds, sometimes they're lies. They come from outside, and then we internalize them. And then other times these lies, they're just internal. They've become a part of who we are. What about these manipulative external forces? Let's think about advertisements. Trying to sell you a product. You are unhappy because you don't have this shampoo. Then you go about thinking for the rest of your day, I'm really unhappy because I don't have that shampoo. Then you see that shampoo in Target and you're like, must get shampoo, I will be happy. Yeah, so there's all these strongholds that try to tell us the way to the good life, to the life that is true. Or what about patterns of thinking or behaviors that we fall into? These strongholds that prevent us from experiencing and knowing God. Now, another question. What is this weapon then that Paul is talking about? What is the weapon that God provides to demolish these strongholds and allow us to experience God, or I would say allow us to experience true living? If God is ultimate truth, then we are being led into a way of living that is the most true. A way of living that is true for who you have been created to be. What is this weapon? You're probably all on the edge of your seat. You're thinking, if it's not a grenade, if it's not a handgun, if it's not my words, well, what is this weapon, Paul? Can somebody please tell us, because I want that life of peace. Verse 5, here's the weapon, which should clear everything up for you. We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. All right, let me pray. We're out of here. This raises another question. What does that mean? Quite a profound question. Which then raises another question. Have you ever tried catching a thought? We're to take captive every thought, but you have a thought, and you're, you ever tried that before? How does that work? You ever put handcuffs on a thought? So Paul gives us the weapon, but we're kind of fuzzy on what it means, right? When I read this, I was a bit fuzzy on it. I said, okay, I can make sense of it. I can understand it. I can try to come up with some way to make this really practical. But then I read another translation. Who's heard of the Message translation by Eugene Peterson before? And I often like to read different translations because sometimes the translators, they get at the text in a different way. And you kind of put these different translations together and you get a fuller picture of what exactly is being said. Here's how Eugene Peterson translates this portion. We use our powerful God tools. I like that. God tools. For smashing. Sounds like Hulk. Warped philosophies, tearing down barriers erected against the truth of God. And here we go, right here at the end. Fitting every loose thought and emotion and impulse into the structure of life shaped by Christ. This is the weapon. We fit everything, every thought, emotion, impulse, into a life shaped by Christ. Here's my best illustration for this. And I wish I had one of these physical items in my hand here this morning, but my kids are older and I've given these all away. But who has seen this before? Or some variation of this toy? We had a whole bunch of these when our kids were younger, and it helps them to learn shapes. Here's the thing about a toy like this. What will happen if you take that pink circle right there and try fitting it into the triangle? It's not going to fit. It's not going to work. What if you take the star and you try to put it over into that rectangle? Each shape has one corresponding part that you have to put it in exactly into whatever the cutout is. So the rectangle goes to the rectangle. Go back to Eugene Peterson's translation. We have to fit every loose thought. The way you demolish these strongholds, the way you move beyond the lies and into the truth, is you fit every loose thought and emotion impulse into the structure of life shaped by Christ. Every single thought, and here's the practice for the week, we have to inspect it. When something comes our way, there's a message that we hear, or there's something bouncing around inside of our head telling us something about ourselves, about the other person, about God. The practice is to sit for a moment, or even if it's behavior. Okay, should I act this way or should I act this way? What's the wisdom here for me? We think, and we grab it. It's like a circle, And if we know that a life shaped by Christ looks like that square, let's call it, you say, okay, does this fit into this shape? Will this fit into this hole right here? If yes, then okay, this is what it looks like to be shaped by Christ. But if no, okay, maybe there's something I'm missing here. Maybe there's another truth. Maybe what I'm being exposed to, what I'm listening to in my head, maybe it's a bit off, and I need to reconsider. How do we demolish strongholds? We inspect all of our thoughts. We inspect our actions. We inspect those impulses, the messages that are coming at us from every which direction, and we ask, does this look like Jesus? Does this look like a life shaped by Christ? Now, the way in which we know what a life shaped by Christ looks like is we read about Jesus. Jesus is the perfect representation of God. And so we become familiar with the message of Jesus, with how Jesus lived, how he interacted with others, how he invited us to live. Let me give you 4 quick examples here this morning. First, stronghold. Let's call it the stronghold of hatred. A stronghold of jealousy, revenge, scorn. Have you ever felt immense wrath directed at another person? And you think, man, if I could just do this to them, if I could pay them back, I would feel really good. I would win the war. And you go back and forth. It keeps you up at night thinking of the perfect way to get your revenge, the perfect word to say to that person. The battle's there in your mind. This hatred that you might have, the jealousy, whatever it happens to be, I would argue that it's taking you away from seeing the other person and even seeing yourself as God truly sees them in you. So there's this stronghold. I mean, this is what it means to be human. We all have these moments. We all have these times when we think, and then when we get our revenge, it just tastes so sweet. So if this is the stronghold, well, what does a life shaped by Christ look like? Oh, and I have this here too. All of these thoughts, whatever stronghold it happens to be, these feelings, these impulses, they take up valuable cerebral real estate, as we looked at last week. Remember, 5% conscious. So if you're thinking about the ways to get even, this is shaping your life in a deep, deep way, because this is what your mind is constantly occupied with. And then there's also this bodily response as well. You all know what it feels like to be extremely angry and want to get even. And it's normally not healthy for your body. I wouldn't even say normally. It's never healthy for your body. Let's put it that way. How's that? Let's be a little more direct. It is not good for your body. So if this is a stronghold, here's what a life shaped by Christ looks like. Matthew 5. You have heard that it was said, love the people that are nice to you. Love those who look and think just like you, but hate your enemy. You've heard this before. It's okay to love this group and hate this group. This is ancient wisdom, and Jesus is saying, hold on a second here. There's another way. There's a better way. I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. In my experience, when there is someone that I am really angry with, and I want to be more powerful, I want to win the war, I feel like I'm being unfairly treated, in my experience, if you pray for that person, your heart will soften towards them. I don't know how it happens. It just does. It's a divine miracle. When you sit and think about how evil, nasty, wrong that person is, you will find a way to validate that. But when you begin looking at the other, whoever the other happens to be, as when you look at your shared humanity and you realize they're human like you, and you realize that they're loved by God just as you are loved by God, and you begin praying for the other person and praying for your heart in the matter, something softens within you. Jesus, it's like, hey, hating your enemy, it's not going to lead our world into a good place. This is not what the kingdom of God looks like. This is not what God desires. You know where that way of thinking leads to? That picture we had with all the weapons? Because it all starts in your mind. When there's an enemy, well, now you have to defeat the enemy. But when you begin praying and seeking love for others, you may not like the person still, but maybe some of these wars could be avoided. Maybe some of the battles that we get into with those that we care about, or coworkers, or whoever it happens to be, maybe some of it could be avoided if we actually followed through with these words of Jesus and began praying for those who we don't like. Let's look at a second stronghold. Stronghold number 2. You ever been caught up in trying to prove your worth? You ever find yourself caught up in a way of living where you're trying to prove that you are worthy, that you're valuable, that you're loved? Again, this is what it means to be human. We think, if I were to just prove myself in this moment, if I could show them how much value I have, well, then I would have arrived. Then I will be worthy of being loved. What does a life shaped by Christ look like? Here's Jesus, Matthew 3, right in the beginning of his ministry. Actually, before his ministry. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was open. He saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." Up until this point in the story, what had Jesus done? He had been born. Before Jesus does anything for God, before Jesus goes and performs miracles and teaches, he's baptized. And there's this voice saying, "This is my boy. And I love him. I'm pleased with him." Not because of what he's done, just because he's my son. And that's how God views all of you. You're not loved because of how you perform. You're not loved because of how much good you've done in life, how much you've achieved. You're loved because you are a son, daughter, you're a child of God. And that's it. You're loved for that reason alone. So whenever there's a message saying, hey, if you do this, then you'll be lovable, you try to fit that in and you realize, wait, hold on a second here. Whoa. No, that's not what a life shaped by Christ looks like. There's a different narrative. So we set that one aside and we pick up the block that says, I'm loved simply because I'm me. Third stronghold. What about fear? Anyone ever experienced fear? Never. All right, Keaton, get up here and show us how it's done. Fear normally comes from a feeling of loss of control. Matthew 3. Therefore, this is Jesus speaking, Sermon on the Mount, greatest hit sermon. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life. Okay, thank you. Doesn't really help. Don't worry about what you'll eat or drink or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? We all know the answer to this is no, yet we all still worry about our lives. There we go, right there, right? Thanks, Jesus. Much easier said, much easier to memorize than to actually believe it and live into it. Now, I'm reading this book right now. Who has heard of this book, Good Inside? This book, if you're a parent or if you're any human, honestly, like this is just like a human book. Amazing, amazing book. Was recommended to me a couple of times. I came across this just the other week and I thought, oh my goodness, this is absolutely perfect for what we're talking about here. Talking about fear. The parent and the child relationship with fear. So the child registers fear until an adult is present. So if there's a child and there's fear, well, the child, okay, there's something going on here. There's some cause for worry. There's some cause for concern. And so until an adult is present, the child registers fear. Then, even if the parent confirms the worst, I know what you're feeling. I know what you're thinking. It is true. So even if the parent confirms the worst fear that the child is holding on to, a child will feel safe knowing that an adult is protecting them. Our supportive, honest, caring presence is what feels safe to our children. I thought about this. Life will present challenges. There will be fearful moments in life. There will be moments when it truly is out of our control. We'll experience tragedy. We'll come face to face with loss. It's all a part of life. Jesus doesn't promise a life free of pain, a life free of hardship, but rather Jesus promises a life of presence, of knowing you're not alone in your loss. You're not alone in your tragedy. As difficult and challenging as life is, the divine presence is always with you. When I read this, I was like, oh my goodness. It's talking about the child-parent relationship, but this is our relationship with God as well. Even if the worst happens, we're not alone in that. And for a child, knowing that, it brings a sense of calmness in the midst of the storm, some peace in the midst of all the chaos that's going around. I mean, when Jesus leaves here right at the end of Matthew, surely I am with you always. Presence, not certainty. So when we find ourselves in a moment of fear and we want to give in to that fear, we're trying to fit it into that truck, hold on a second here. We pause and we remind ourselves, okay, yes, this is going to be challenging. This is going to be difficult, but I'm not alone in this. There's a presence that travels with me. And then our final stronghold. Have you ever believed yourself to be a failure? Or have you ever felt like you would never amount to anything? Have you ever found yourself haunted by shame or regret? Again, all common human feelings. Here is what a life shaped by Christ looks like. One of my favorite Jesus stories. Did I put it here? Yeah, we're in John chapter 8. At dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him. He sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group. They were publicly shaming her. They said to Jesus, "Hey, teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. Jesus bent down, started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on badgering him, they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time. The older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with a woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir. They've all left." "Then neither do I condemn you. Go, leave your life of sin. Walk a new path. Have a fresh beginning." Sometimes we get caught in this loop of beating ourselves up over where we've been, what we've done. And we keep replaying a scene in our minds over and over again. And we begin to believe this narrative, this lie that tells us, you could never do anything good. You could never amount to anything. You could never please God with your life. The person that you think you could be, well, no, there's no way, because your past is too riddled. And here's what a life shaped by Christ looks like. We've all been there. We've all messed up. We've all blown it. We've all sinned. But I don't condemn you. There's forgiveness. And there's a fresh beginning. And your past does not need to define you. You can leave your shame and your regret right here, and you can walk forward into a new and different reality. This is what a life shaped by Christ looks like. So our practice for this week, maybe you want to go out and buy one of these. It's going to be a run on Amazon. You're going to be texting me, I don't know, Amazon sold out. I don't know what happened to them. Every thought, every impulse, every emotion, everything, message that comes at you, does this fit into what a life shaped by Christ looks like? You inspect it. Maybe you want to read through the Gospels this week and you want to familiarize yourself with Jesus, with how he taught and what he spoke to people, how he treated people, and then allow those truths to be that which guides your life, and allow those truths to be that which gets stuck on repeat in your head so that we can push out all the lies, so that we can demolish and Hulk smash all the strongholds, and that we can experience the truth, the living God whose love and presence is with you and always for you.